Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Oklahoma Postgame Live here at the Voice of College Football. Oklahoma loses a heartbreaker to Baylor today, 38-35 inside Gaylord Family Oklahoma Memorial Stadium. Thanks for joining, guys. Just remember to hit that like notification bell, subscribe to the channel, and know exactly when we go live. Each and every week, we cover each and every game, post-game live here for about 30 to 45 minutes, maybe an hour, just kind of depending on how the conversation goes and what everybody wants to hear. So again, Oklahoma loses a heartbreaker, and it seems to be a trend for this Sooners team, really kind of finding different ways to lose each week. When you go and if you look at the box score, Oklahoma statistically, I don't know that I would say controlled the game, but statistically, they led in nearly every category, except for a couple, and the couple that are very important. The three first half turnovers, interceptions by Dylan Gabriel, were ended up being kind of the difference maker in the game. Two of those were not really Gabriel's fault. One of them was the last one was just a poor decision, threw it late, and got tipped again, and obviously intercepted. But it was just an ill-advised pass. A lot more clean in the second half for Oklahoma, but still. The thing that's been a bugaboo for this team defensively is not getting off the field, being able to get off the field on third and fourth down. Fourth down today ended up being the big thing. And Oklahoma was fairly decent third down coverage, just in terms of limiting Baylor's success on third down. Baylor was only 4 for 13 on third down conversions, but they were 3 for 3 on fourth down conversions, which was big, obviously. And then I think Ryan here in the chat had mentioned that, and we'll talk through that. But not only the three interceptions, but Baylor nearly had 300 yards of rushing in the game, 281 to be exact. So again, a game, penalties, 8 penalties for 64 yards, another kind of another indicator for Oklahoma, just in terms of beating themselves. Um, Again, like I said, it seems to be a different way that Oklahoma finds ways to lose games. Late. Late in the game, couple of games that obviously were not close, but when you look at the Kansas State game, couldn't get off the field on third down. Again, here very similar against Baylor, not able to get off the ball or get off the field on first down. So we'll run through some team stats and individual stats, and then we'll talk through just kind of overall thoughts again from the offense and the defensive side. Like I said, Oklahoma won really kind of won the statistical battle outside of the ones that means the most, which is obviously the scoreboard, turnovers, and the penalties was a big one as well. Oklahoma had 29 first downs in the game compared to Baylor's 24. Total yards 499 for Oklahoma, 413 for Baylor. Dylan Gabriel 22 out of 34, 261 yards, 2 touchdowns, and the three interceptions that we mentioned. Blake Shapen, 14 of 20. 14 of 23 for 132 yards. No touchdown through the air, but did have that one interception by Billy Bowman. That was a really, really good play by him, without a doubt. We talked about third down conversions. Baylor was 4 for 13. Oklahoma was 10 for 15. So really good on that side. And then the rushing. Baylor had 48 carries for 281 yards, nearly 6 yards per carry. And Oklahoma was good, but not quite to the level that Baylor was, just from a domination perspective there in the second half. 45 carries for 238 yards. We mentioned the eight penalties for 64 yards for Oklahoma, 6 for 65 for Baylor. So that was, kind of a wash. And then obviously the three crucial first half turnovers for Oklahoma. Eric Gray was probably the best player on the field for Oklahoma today. 23 carries for 106 yards, 2 touchdowns, 8 catches, 58 yards out of the backfield. So really, really good job with from Eric Gray's perspective, just being the guy that Oklahoma needs him to be. So he's a guy that has lived up to the expectations, even if team wise they certainly hasn't lived up to that to that level of expectation. But Eric Gray has been everything that Oklahoma needs him to be. Um, and then Marvin Mims had a really good game again, good comeback game for him after probably one of the worst games that he's ever had um, at the history. My apologies, guys. The history of Oklahoma in his career at Oklahoma last week, and he had four catches, 120 yards, one touchdown. That one touchdown early in the first half, but um, and then like not much specifically from a receiving perspective for Baylor. Only had 132 yards. Um, Squirrel Williams, 25 carries, 192 yards, 2 touchdowns. Could have went over 200 if he wouldn't have went down there, which was just a really smart play for him. As well. But yeah, not a whole else a lot else that you can talk about, guys, other than the fact that Oklahoma still continues to find ways to lose. And you go to 5-4, 2-4 in conference now. Again, I think if you would if you're Oklahoma, you win that game. You have 3 straight wins. You're headed to playing 3 teams that are kind of licking their wounds to a certain degree. When you look at West Virginia, which is losing to Iowa State, last time I checked, it was, I'll look here while we're talking, 24-7 late in that game. Oklahoma State losing to Kansas today, in pretty convincing fashion. I think 34-10. I think might have been the last score that I've seen. 34-16 now. Iowa State's actually up on West Virginia 31-7 now. So the good thing is Oklahoma. The bad news is it's a road game. I think the good news is that this is, I think, West Virginia right now, based on the way they're playing, the standings in the Big 12 is probably the worst team in the Big 12. So, um, you get to regroup and go play there in a tough environment, which always is at West Virginia. Kind of depending on when the game is. If it's a night game, obviously it's a little bit tougher, but um, then you've got these 3 games to try to get one win. And against Oklahoma State is where, as I talked a few minutes ago, down 34-16 to Kansas, and has really struggled the last couple of weeks. So might be the one of the most, even though I know it's meaningful here within the state, but maybe not necessarily as meaningful as the game has been. In a while. So there's lots of comments and there's lots of discussions going back and forth related, obviously, to the defense. And I think that's very consistently going to be the case. Now, I think there's a couple of schools of thought here. What's the problem on defense? Is it the and this has been I think, kind of the question, guys, that has been at the forefront of a lot of our minds over the last, you know, frankly, 5 to 7 years. Watching this program play defense. Is it the players or is it the coaching? Now you're in a spot where you've had over these last 5 to 7 years, you've had Mike Stoops as a defensive coordinator. You've had Ruffin McNeil in an interim role. Um, as a defensive coordinator. You've had Alex Grinch as a defensive coordinator, and then now you have some sort of combination of Brent Venables and Ted Roof as a defensive coordinator at Oklahoma, and you're seeing similar results each and every year. With this year, arguably statistically being the worst of all of them. Right, Oklahoma is statistically one of the worst teams defensively in the country. I think certainly one of the worst defensive teams in the Big 12, right there with West Virginia. But I think take everything if you take everything into consideration, Oklahoma is probably the worst performing team defensively in the Big 12, holistically. So, um, so what is it? And I think where you have to where you have to look at this, guys, is I think over the last few years it has been some sort of combination of both of them. You can't put a ton of blame on Venables and Ted Roof and the defensive staff that he's built this year, because by and large he's playing with a lot of players and with a scheme of players that don't necessarily fit that scheme. So you have to be able, as frustrating as it is for everyone to see, you have to a certain degree give this staff and give this year a bit of a pass. Just because, as I mentioned, just because he doesn't have his players in there. Yeah, it's disappointing. It's way worse of a performing defense than I ever thought that we would see out of a Brent Venables coach defense, right? I think going into the season, I thought this Oklahoma team had a chance to be top 30 overall defensively. Thought that we would have some games that we might struggle, maybe a Kansas State game here and there, maybe a Baylor game here and there. But I think overall, I think this has been highly, highly disappointing in where Oklahoma is right now. So you can't put a ton of blame on Brent Venables right now. You can't put a ton of blame on the defensive coaching staff right now. Now, if we're at this point next year and this team is performing at the same level defensively, then you can start to put some blame on what this coaching staff looks like. But I think everybody has to kind of stay the course and be patient and see what does this defensive recruiting class end up looking like at the end of the day. Um, could they pull a shocker and somehow get DJ Hicks to flip from Texas A&M back to Oklahoma? Does he bring some guys with him? What does that class end up like, right? So look at that. Look at what happens in the portal. I think you're going to see a lot of guys, for lack of a better word, processed this year that don't really fit this scheme, that are going to look elsewhere. Um, for different in different areas, and just increasing the talent in this team, and the guys that Oklahoma needs to have to run this Brent Venables style of defense from a coaching perspective. Now, what I will say here, guys, is I do think there's there's probably going to be a sacrificial lamb, for lack of a better word, um, just in terms of the defensive staff, because while I think that you have to give this coaching staff, particularly Venables and the rest of the staff, you have to give them a pass for this first year. At the same time, I think where Oklahoma stands defensively right now, it can't go unpunished, so to speak. So I think I would be surprised if Ted Roof is here again next year. It's just I don't have any inside information, um, none of that. But you can't bring in the level of staff that Oklahoma has on the defensive side of the ball, and it's elite, guys. It is a very elite coaching staff on the defensive side. Is it Bama good? No. Is it even Georgia good? No, obviously not. But this is a really, really good defensive staff. When you look at Todd Bates, he's been one of the best defensive line coaches in the country over the last few years at Clemson. Brent Venables comes in as one of the best, if not the best, defensive coordinator in the country. You've got Jay Valai that coached in the NFL, coached at Alabama last year. You've got Brandon Hall that has been successful where he's been. You've got Miguel Chavis that was at Clemson, but was ready, for this on the field role this year. So you've got guys that are really, really good coaches, and they didn't just forget how to coach just because they came to Oklahoma. So I think there is a very significant and very clear deficiency in talent across the board. I think it's very evident on the defensive line. And I think it was maybe fool's gold for some of us thinking that just one off season in Schmidt's program was going to make these guys different, right? I mean, we can tell that the bodies are a little bit different than they have been in the past, but I think at the same time, you've got you've got guys that you need to get into a you got guys that you need to get into a different consistent body type. And then I think a big part of this is mentality. You got if you're Oklahoma, you have to have a much or the coaching staff, you have to drill into these you got to drill into these kids of the mentality that they have. There's you see quitting, not necessarily by the entire team, but and not necessarily at all times, but you see at times where the effort is not necessarily what it needs to be. I can think of 2 touchdown runs. The last one, that ended up being the clincher for Baylor was way too easy. Off tackle play that the kid never even got touched. There was another play in the first half where, I think it was a short 2 or 3-yard touchdown run, and the guy didn't even get touched. I think when you go situations like that, Baylor doesn't have that much better players than Oklahoma. They're really good on the offensive line, don't get me wrong, but their players aren't that much better than what players Oklahoma has to not have a guy even be touched, when he's running 9, 10 yards. So those are things that are concerning for me. Um, Not football, but basketball when I as I'm a high school basketball coach, those are the things that would be very, very concerning to me to see some level of quit that's happening. And so, I think the softness is a big, big concern, that we're seeing, on this team. I think that I don't know that the tackling is super, super bad. It was good to start the year. There was some games where it was not great, but, there's not a whole lot of missed tackles or not a whole lot of busts. In the secondary, it doesn't look like there's a whole lot of bust in coverage, but I think what you're seeing is, you're seeing situations where this team isn't up to the challenge from a physical standpoint, and that's not necessarily just a this year thing. That's been something in the past, and it takes time for that mindset and mentality to change, right? Um, so I think there's more talk about that defensively, right? But I think the offense is good enough to win. Obviously, you can't throw 3 interceptions and know what kind of team that you have overall and feel like that you can win a game. The margin for error is not where is not where it's at right now. Oklahoma's not as good on offense as they were a few years ago under Lincoln Riley. Um, Not even necessarily as good as they were last year. So, and I think the thing is, Gabriel's a good player. Don't get me wrong. And like I said, 2 of those 3 interceptions weren't really his fault. They were just bad luck. But when you look at the fact that Oklahoma just doesn't have as good of players, and it's nothing. And this isn't an indictment on Jeff Lebby at all. I think he's done a really good job this year. The offensive staff has done a fine job, but there there are no the talent drop off that we've had on this Oklahoma offensive, just Oklahoma team overall. But when you look at offensively, um, it's not the same. You've got Marvin Mims, who's a really nice receiver, but outside of that, you don't have a game changer. You've got love Drake Stoops to death. He's not, if he's one of your best receivers, it's you're not as dynamic as you need to be. Jalil Farouk is a nice receiver, but he's not at the same level of a Mario Williams. Dylan Gabriel is not at the same level of a Caleb Williams. And so Eric Gray is a different back, but he's not quite as good as Kennedy Brooks. Just as a pure running back. Now he's had a really really good season this year, so that's not a significant step. Offensive line has actually been much better than I thought that they would be at the first of the year, the way they played early on. Um, but again, guys, this is the thing that I very, very much struggle with when and it's not just this chat. I see this all over Facebook, all over Twitter, that as soon as things go wrong, the I think the automatic or the natural reaction is that a coach needs to be fired. Things things just go wrong. Sometimes you can do everything that you need to do. You can say everything that you need to say. You can prepare these kids as much as you can possibly prepare them in the time that you have. They just don't do what they need to do on the field 100% of the time, whether that's lack of ability, lack of effort, lack of focus and concentration. It just doesn't always happen, right? So I very much struggle, particularly at first year staff. I very much struggle with the inclination that coaches, and yes, I get it. You can fire coaches, you can't necessarily fire players. Well, you can this day and age. The transfer portal is the way that players get fired, right? And this happens all over the place, and this will happen this year with Oklahoma. There's going to be guys at the end of the season that the coaching staff, Brent Venables individually, they'll meet as a team and they'll say, we've they'll tell these kids, hey, basically in no uncertain words, um, I think from a future perspective, your best bet is to go look elsewhere because you're not at the level that we need you to be, um, defensively, or offensively, whatever the case may be, whoever the kid is. So I think one thing that's going to be interesting really here is, and I think maybe even more interesting because you know quite frankly Oklahoma doesn't have a ton to play for right now, other than a other than a bowl bid, and I think there's a lot of people that probably don't really care that much about that. Now, I think it's good for the players and good for the coaching staff, just because they need those extra practices with some of those young kids, and just getting them the opportunity to play in the bowl game after a season of really kind of disappointment in terms of not meeting those expectations that you have at the University of Oklahoma, and not meeting those, and not being at the not playing at the level that you really need to play at, if you're Oklahoma. So again, that will be something that's um, very, I think, crucial when you look at how this recruiting class ends up. What does the transfer portal look like? Because again, I think when I think coaches, anytime they come in, um, I think when you come in to a season, you kind of look and see what's that, especially as a first year coach, what's that 2-3 year plan look like? Because typically it takes coaches. Some situations are different than others. When Riley came in, he was set up, very, very well for success. Venables, not quite as much in terms of the guys that transferred out, transferred to USC, and things like that. So there was a little bit of probably a change in terms of what that looked like. I think me, just kind of on the outside looking in, I thought this team had a chance to contend for a Big 12 title, and that was the extent of, what they would be, um, essentially what they would be able to do. I did not think that this team had the ability to make the playoffs, but could contend for a Big 12. So obviously they're nowhere close to that. So I think from an expectation perspective, the 3 year plan has probably been moved to four, to 4 years in terms of I think next year is the year that you would consider a successful season if you're Oklahoma and you're contending for a Big 12 title next year, given that this team could finish anywhere from 5-7 to 7-5. I think now, right? So, um, I mean, I guess you have a chance at 8-4 still, but looking for this team to win 3 straight games may not necessarily happen. But you never know. You've got Texas Tech, a team that's not playing particularly well. Oklahoma State's not playing well. West Virginia's not playing super well right now. So you've got three of the not bottom feeders, but OSU's still there around the middle of the pack. But again, just um, both teams, Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, both teams going in the opposite direction that they really need to be going in right now. Um, so tough. It's a tough reality, but I think it's a reality that Oklahoma's in right now. So um, now like I said, now you go to Morgantown next week. I don't believe there's been a start time that's been established for that game yet, to my knowledge. So I think that we'll find that out probably either tomorrow or Monday. Um, but that it's um, not looking like that will probably be a primetime game or anything like that. I would suspect an 11 a.m. game or maybe even another ESPN Plus game, without a doubt. So Um, just some other things to across the country here. Let's look at the Big 12 first. As we mentioned, Kansas beat Oklahoma State 37-16. Iowa State with a 31-14 win over West Virginia. TCU 34-24 victory over Texas Tech, and then Texas and Kansas State playing a little bit later this evening. Actually, just in a few minutes, getting ready to kick over on FS1. Big game, just really a big game there. If if Kansas State's able to win that game, they put themselves in a really, really strong position um, kind of being able to make that Big 12 championship game. TCU is obviously absolutely in the driver's seat, really just in terms of getting themselves in position to being 6-0 right now, 2 more games. Sorry, three more games. They have to go on the road to a couple. TCU goes to Texas. TCU goes to Baylor. So Baylor's still in it. Obviously, they're in the third place spot right now. Um, at 4-2. Oklahoma's at 2-4. Could have had a swing one way or the other there for that one, um, but yeah, that's where everything's at from from a Big 12 perspective, and then and then nationally, the big game of the day obviously was Tennessee and Georgia. Georgia's winning that game right now, 27-13. Um, Georgia really, I don't know how many people were going back and forth or watching that. Really dominated that game. Um, on the in the first half at least. Maybe not quite as much in the second half. Looks like I don't know if Georgia called off the dogs to a certain degree, but 27-13 there. Looks like we have an upset in Champaign that's brewing here. Michigan State's up 23-15 over Illinois with about 11 seconds to go. Illinois does have the ball at the Michigan State 27, so we'll see how that one finishes. So a little bit of an upset, um, possibly looking right there. Then a couple of really big games this evening. Obviously, we talked about the Texas Kansas State game. Alabama and LSU kick off at 6 as well. And then Clemson at Notre Dame kick off at 6:30. And then you've got UCLA and Arizona State late at 9:30. That should be kind of an interesting game. UCLA and USC, they're battling for Pac-12 supremacy, along with obviously you got USC, UCLA, Oregon, Utah right there as well. So the kind of the playoff picture and the national picture will get clearer. Obviously, the Heisman Trophy is interesting. It's kind of up. I think it's really up in the air right now. With Hendon Hooker not having a good game for for Tennessee, and obviously losing. I think Hendon Hooker was um, 23 for 33, 195 yards, no touchdowns and an interception. And then you look at C.J. Stroud was really bad for Ohio State earlier today. Let's look at his stats as well. And then 10 out of 26 for 76 yards. Did have 79 yards rushing, but Heisman is about as wide open as it's ever been. So, um, and so now we kind of look at, the last half of this year, what possible, transfer portal additions, how does this recruiting class, how do they end up, for the end of this regular season, for Oklahoma. So those are things to, and can they get bowl eligible? I think this team, I think they'll find at least one win in these next 3 games. I don't know if it'll be next week. I don't know if it'll be Bedlam or Texas Tech to end the regular season, but I think they find a win somewhere in the midst here in the rest of the regular season as well. So thanks everybody for joining today. We'll be at a little bit of a different time because I'm actually going out of town next week, so I'll be gone Wednesday. But look for us either Monday or Tuesday. Make sure you hit that like button, hit the notification bell. Make sure you subscribe so you get all the information that we get. Again, Oklahoma loses another heartbreaker. Another way to lose the game for Oklahoma 38-35 to Baylor, and find themselves with 1 game to win in the next 3 to get to bowl eligibility, which is something that I don't think any of us would have ever thought would ever have been a possibility. So enjoy the rest of your Saturday. God bless, and Boomer Sooner.